situation, the developments in Ethiopia, particularly in terms of the assault on civil society and dissenting voices, is part of the global trend. In fact, I can say Ethiopia is one of the pioneers on the African continent in terms of introducing these draconian legislative measures, taking the strategy of making the dealings with civil society organizations, the media, very legalistic, in the sense that the traditional way of just picking up dissidents and jailing them without even any question and follow-up consequences has shifted when civil society and the media have played a very critical role in the country's 2005 elections, where the ruling party, which has been in power for 25 years now, has been threatened, where the opposition made significant gains both in the federal and regional parliaments, thanks to a very pre-election discourse that has been unprecedented in Ethiopia, largely spearheaded by civil society organizations. So that was the ultimate signal for the ruling Ethiopian People's Revolutionary Democratic Front. So there follows, right after the election, disputes were somehow resolved in 2006 and early 2007. The government engaged in introducing legislative measures, reforming the electoral law, deliberately making it ultimately impossible for any opposition groups to field any candidates. So some of the measures were, I think now it's widely known around the world as the Charities and Societies Proclamation in Ethiopia, which was enacted to govern NGO activities, which essentially banned any form of human rights work for organizations that receive more than 10% of their funding from foreign sources. In a situation where you have a country which is one of the poorest in the world, and where NGOs and civil society organizations used to get 100% of their funding from foreign donors, and also you have a government where that draws up to 40% of its annual budget from donor sources, imposing a restriction on foreign funding. Foreign funding would mean essentially closing down of human rights organizations, and that's in fact what happened. If I take my own example, the organization I was heading used to have 12 offices around the country when the Charities and Societies law was enacted in 2009, and more than 60 paid employees around the world engaged in critical human rights monitoring, investigation, and reporting. That was an organization which was targeted from the get-go by the government. So by the time the law has come into effect in late 2009, we had to close 9 of our 12 offices and had to let go about 45 of the employees we had. So you can imagine the impact on smaller organizations. So it was essentially a decimation of human rights organizations. The same thing happened with the independent media. The government started making regulations extremely tight, getting license for operating a press office had become extremely cumbersome, and on top of that there was a widespread and systematic crackdown of critical journalists. And and that was backed by the enactment of the anti-terrorism law in 2009. So this law particularly was designed to target critical voices, including investigative journalists. And if you see the roster of people that are facing terrorism charges in Ethiopia, and people that are fleeing the country, independent journalists stand at the top. So we have independent journalists who were accused of being terrorists just on the basis of the things they write. They write about government corruption, they write about human rights abuses, police brutality, and security forces abuses. So a combination of violent crackdown, jailing of journalists and human rights activists on the basis of terrorism accusation, coupled with and backed by these draconian legislative measures, has now resulted in a complete blackout of information, independent information on human rights and governance issues when it comes to Ethiopia. And what happened after the closure of these mainstream critical voices, a few of the remaining activists resorted to social media and the internet to do whatever little activism that they could. But what we are seeing now is government shifting its attack on that platform. And I don't know if you remember, just last month the Prime Minister went to the UN General Assembly and told that assembly that social media and internet are causing the problems, the protests in the country that is taking place right now. So the extent to which these governments are going to stifle independent voices, I think is seen in the situation in Ethiopia more vividly than any other places. So we have, like I said, a country dependent on groups like the World Bank and major donors, the US and the EU, for 40% of its budget annually, and for its grand development ventures. And mind you, this is a government that draws at this point its legitimacy from its delivery on the economic front. That remains debatable depending on which information you are looking at, but there are undeniable strides in some economic sectors. But the situation in terms of good governance, in terms of human rights, and a very growing practice of corruption is visible because largely of the lack of independent information due to the closing of the space and a lack of the space again for people to air their grievances. I think that is partly because of that we are seeing simple protests that starts as simple demands of people for good governance and maladministrations to be mitigated, growing into questions of regime change, threatening the very sustainability and existence of the Ethiopian Federation.